You know, I wrote a book called Cloak of the Illuminati in the year 2002, and that was my first kind of foray into the whole transhuman area. And I remember back then I was especially fired up. My real interest in this light body phenomena, and again with the Anunnaki, as I started to see that the Anunnaki were called the Shining Ones. And one reason why was because they possessed a transmittable cloak or garment. Sitchin didn't know about this. This word was that refers to this garment was not really dug up by Sumerian scholars until the early 2000s. And the word is malamu. It's a Sumerian word that means radiance, luminosity, shining, and supernatural power. And it's a term that the Sumerians applied to the Anunnaki, to a cloak or garment that they wore, the malamu, that gave them their shining luminosity. And the thing is that this cloak or garment could be transmitted to a human. So an Anunnaki could provide this cloak or garment to a human, and a human then could become an Anunnaki, a shining one with luminosity, radiance, and superpowers, like the Anunnaki, which is why they were called the Mighty Ones. And as I'm tracking this, I'm noticing there's a whole continuous line of deities and even humans that acquired this garment. Enoch is one, Elijah, John the Baptist, Jesus, Mary Magdalene. They all have references to acquiring this miracle garment. And first part of 2002, as I'm finishing this book and talking about this garment, here comes this Department of Commerce report, U.S. Department of Commerce. They took all the big tech companies that were in existence back then. It was Apple, Microsoft, people like that, and said, some of you are working with bits or computer science. Some of you are working with atoms or nanotechnology. Some of you are working with neurons or neuroscience. And some of you are working with genes or genetics. And what we want to do is we want to merge all four of those technologies into a single seamless technology aimed at the human skin in order to introduce a new golden age and also a new type of human being. And when I was talking about that back in 2002, I'd be like on Coast to Coast or something, and people would literally write to me saying, "You're nuts. This will never happen. You will never see humans merge with technology." You know, David Icke is talking about people putting chips in their brain. You're talking about them replacing our whole skin and breaking the skin barrier and turning us into robots. And I said, yeah, that's the plan. They plan to do this by 2035. And I remember back in 2002, hey, at least we got another 33 years or so before this is going to happen. But now you look around and that is very clearly what is happening.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
It's my great pleasure to welcome William Henry to Exopolitics Today. I first heard of William's work in 2003, and it actually played a role in my exopolitics research at the day because he had some really original, groundbreaking things to say about Iraq that no one else was saying. And when I looked into it, it was really amazing that it checked out with facts on the ground, and it actually led to one of my most popular exopolitics articles of all time. But we'll get into that. So first of all, I want to welcome you, William, to the show.
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
So how did you get involved in this field of investigating myths and different cultures around the world?
I really started in college. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and I moved to Nashville, where I had a deep interest in music. I'm a guitar player, and I was going to be an entertainment lawyer. And I went to a small Southern Baptist college here in Nashville that offered an entertainment music business program. It would get you ready to go to work on Music Row and pursue a career in the music business. But the catch was, because it was a Baptist college, you had to take Bible study classes. And I knew nothing about the Bible. I like to say growing up, the four apostles in our home were Waylon, Willie, Chris, and Johnny. And it was all about music and that kind of thing. And so in 1982, when I started at this school, I was in a sociology class, and the professor assigned us to review a book whose implications would impact Christianity. So off I went to the local bookstore, and there was a brand new international bestseller called Holy Blood, Holy Grail. I'm sure some of your viewers are familiar with it. It, of course, is the book that inspired Dan Brown to write the Da Vinci Code. And the assignment was to write a 3-page review of this book that we had picked. Well, I was instantly hooked on this idea. The premise of Holy Blood, Holy Grail said that the crucifixion was a hoax. Jesus and Mary Magdalene were married. They had children. There were lost secrets in this tiny hilltop village in southern France called Rennes-le-Château. The Catholic Church had wiped out 1 million Cathars to try to protect the secrets and keep the original version of Christianity from being known. And I wanted to know what it was all about. What was that original version of the story that has been largely kept secret? And that kind of launched me into this whole area of ancient mysteries and interest in the angels, fallen angels, human transformation into celestial beings, portals, gateways. That book really was the power pack that launched me onto this quest.
Well, that conflict between the fallen angels that's described in the book of Genesis, actually, the book of Enoch goes into great detail about that. And so did you at any point realize or come to the conclusion that this was not just a war between these spiritual entities, that the book of Enoch was actually describing a real-life physical war between off-world civilizations?
Yeah, it took a while. I later into the 90s and 2000s started getting interested in the Essenes. They're thought to be the authors of the Book of Enoch. They made a superhero out of a figure that there's literally a one-liner about him in the Book of Genesis. Enoch walked with God. That's all it said. And the Essenes took him and started writing all of these superhero stories about him, about the fallen angels, and putting a whole different spin on that story. And you're right, it did open up for me this concept that, okay, the angels are real. And that was a huge part of the Essene revolution, is that they claimed in the Dead Sea Scrolls that they were living with angels. And these angels were teaching them how to transform into celestial beings. And there's a lot of controversy about whether humans can actually ascend on their own. Can a human transform into an angel? Aren't angels made of a celestial substance and our bodies are made of earthly matter? Can earthly matter be transmuted into celestial matter? These are all bones of contention among people, but I always answered in the affirmative that, yeah, humans could transform into celestial beings. In fact, they called in a high celestial being, Yeshua, the Christ, who assisted them in showing the way to transmuting our body into a different form capable of traveling in the stars. So yeah, I was most definitely influenced by Enoch, and still am influenced by Enoch, but especially the Essenes' take on that figure.
Yeah, I found that very fascinating, reading the Book of Enoch. And I know there's kind of 3 versions or 3 different books now that are floating around. And one of the books actually talks about his transformation into this highly evolved being, Metatron, and it's this whole kind of transformation or this ascension. I mean, it sounds like it's a very important part of the Book of Enoch and his life and his teachings. But yet, of course, you know, as you said, you only get one line in the Bible. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Along the way in my journey, like in the 90s, I had zeroed in on a collection of, I call them power tools, that are actually the identifiers of the Messiah in Jewish legend. It includes the Ark of the Covenant, a flask of manna or star food, angel food, and a jar of anointing oil, as well as the rod or staff of Aaron. And I really started to lock on to that anointing oil idea, because that also appeared in the book of Enoch. We're told that the archangel Michael came and took Enoch to the third heaven, anointed his body with an oil that dissolved it into light, so that now Enoch's body was the same as the angels. And I wondered, and I still am on this track, what kind of an oil could dissolve the human body into light, so now that the person has a body that's identical to the angels?
That is fascinating. So those oils, I mean, do you think that might be similar to the elixirs that alchemists talk about? I mean, there's lots of talk about how alchemy has been preserved and continues to flourish. There are a few people that practice it today, and their kind of elixirs are really very powerful transformative tools.
Yeah, I'm sure that that is what the alchemists are seeking. And ultimately, of course, it's all about utilizing the body as a vessel, as the alchemist's flask or glass vessel that can produce these oils. And so a huge part of my personal quest and professional quest is understanding the mystical anatomy of the human body, how it's originally was designed to function as a sort of a stairway to heaven from the soul's perspective, and how ultimately we can kickstart this process within us to produce this transmutation or metamorphosis.
And of course, the really kind of intriguing aspect of that, given my interest in exopolitics, is that extraterrestrials have been playing a critical role in that for as far back as we know in history, that they have been teaching and giving these tools for transforming and elevating consciousness.
Absolutely, Michael. I totally agree with it. In fact, back in around 1991, I think, is when I first read Zecharia Sitchin's book. And of course, he took us down this path that the Anunnaki were a slave race or slave masters, and enslaving the human race in this quest for gold and all of this. But when you really read those stories, there was always an element of transformation in the stories. There was always a temple they were setting up that would teach humans how to transform into Anunnaki. In fact, the first story of when they created the first being, the prototype human, if you will, Adapa, the first thing they did was took him on the path of heaven. And so that was a real red flag for me. It's that thinking, well, if Sitchin's saying that the Anunnaki created humans as slaves, why did the first thing that happened, why was it that they took Adapa on the path to heaven? It suggested to me that there was something else going on in these stories, and that it really was more about the Anunnaki intervening and assisting us in our transformation into celestial beings and connecting us with these other celestials.
Okay, so Sitchin maybe oversimplified, or maybe he was misled.
No, he himself said, I don't know why they're here. Maybe they're here for gold. Most people, I call this the gospel of Zecharia Sitchin, because a lot of people who especially quote the Sitchin says the Anunnaki are slave masters never read Sitchin. And when you actually read his books, he says, I don't know why they came here. And he started to hypothesize, maybe they came for gold. Yeah, maybe they did. And maybe they needed gold to repair their decaying atmosphere. The Sumerian texts never say anything like that. But Sitchin hypothesized it and became kind of the gospel for a lot of people. And we've had to sort of unwind that hypothesis a little bit, because it produces a victim mentality. And that became sort of a dark side of what was happening as we started to try to understand this in the 90s and the 2000s.
So when you go through the ancient literature, biblical literature, Sumerian literature, you come across these terms, the Anunnaki, the Nephilim, the Archons, and the Watchers. What are the differences between those different groups?
Well, in definitions, the Anunnaki came from the throne of Anu. which is thought to be in a celestial realm, probably not a planet called Nibiru. That was another one of Sitchin's sort of reinterpretations. So the Anunnaki are the angels that are the fallen angels of the Book of Genesis. They come from the throne of Anu. They are, while they're on Earth, they are the ones that produce this hybrid race that the Book of Genesis identifies as the Nephilim, the offspring of the fallen angels and human beings. And then later, you get a term applied to them, especially by the Essenes, referring to them as the Watcher angels. And then much later than that, 400 years after the Essenes, is when the Gnostics come in and they start speaking of a group of beings called archons that are subservient to Sophia. She's a sort of a fallen goddess who's without the permission of the divine being or the divine ones, has created a fallen world that the archons are now the rulers over. And that is the Gnostic explanation for this mimic or fake reality that they claim that we live in.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that intrigues me about the biblical tradition, the Book of Enoch, is it talks about these pre-flood patriarchs, Enoch, Methuselah, Jared, and it describes the Great Flood. Now, as far as I understand, the Great Flood took place around 9600 BC, which is when the Younger Dryas period ended, and there was an actual rapid heating of the Earth, or at least the northern hemisphere, and you had a lot of things going underwater, including Atlantis that Plato wrote about. So I'm just wondering if you agree, or maybe can elaborate on whether or not this pre-flood civilization that's talked about in the Bible actually equates with the time of Atlantis.
I think it does. I really, when you're talking about Plato's story, of course, this is an allegory. He's not writing it as history, but he is describing a culture, a civilization that existed 9,000 years before his time. And of course, Plato lived around 600 BC. So that perfectly aligns with that Younger Dryas window, or the end of the Younger Dryas window. But what I'm intrigued about with Plato's story is that his insistence on, again, this being an allegory, and this is a morality tale, and this idea that the Atlanteans were hybrid beings. They were offspring of the gods, and the gods had bequeathed to them a divine element. And Plato had warned or said that the Atlanteans were warned that as long as they lived in alignment in a righteous manner with that divine element, everything was going to be fine. But of course, the morality tale is that humanity drifted away from that righteousness and purity, and the solution was ultimately the cataclysm that destroyed Atlantis. So I look at that and I think, okay, that's very interesting, because there's a race of beings that are described by the Gnostics. The Essenes allude to them. They're referred to as perfect light humans. And they are thought to have existed in the time before the flood. And I believe that Enoch was one of the perfect light humans. So was Noah. Noah was perfect in his generation. In other words, the Noah story, in some people's opinion, corresponds with that Atlantean type of civilization, certainly pre-flood. And there was a judgment. And Noah and his family were the ones that were judged as perfect in their generation, which means that they were judged to be righteous and upright people. But in my vernacular, and in the lens through which I look at this, and I use that word perfect as sort of a golden needle to weave my way through various traditions. In the Tibetan tradition, when you talk about perfect light beings or perfect light humans, you're talking about humans who have dissolved their body, their flesh and blood body, into what the Tibetans call the rainbow light body, or the great perfection. And it made me start to think, well, maybe Noah and Enoch, when Enoch, his body was dissolved into that of an angel, he was described as rainbow colored, just like what we find with the Tibetan rainbow light body. So I'm kind of the opinion that what if, or putting as a hypothesis, what if this pre-flood race really were able to attain what we refer to as the rainbow light body or their mystic light body? And this is in part what was lost after the cataclysm.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Because I know the Book of Enoch, as well as what you were describing from Plato's recounting of the End of Atlantis. It's all about this advanced civilization that abused technology, that went in the wrong direction, but also there were elements of that maintained those righteous ways and were in alignment with God, with the Supreme Being, and that they were helped. So it makes sense that this actually was the way in which that whole kind of flood played out, that certain portions of humanity, probably the majority, got wiped out because they were kind of decadent, whereas there was a significant minority that did have higher evolution, or that had learned the lessons they needed to learn from the celestials. So
and that's such an important point, Michael, because if you follow the Christian path and where we talk about the second coming, there's a reference in Christian prophecy that when the second coming happens, it will be as in the days of Noah. And so what that's saying is that it's like we're going to experience a repeat of what happened in the days of Noah, and maybe even a repeat in what happened with the Atlantean civilization, as if this is sort of a recurring phenomena that humanity, it has these instructors that come in. Some people get it. Most probably don't get it, but there is a judgment day that takes place, and it's nothing personal. It's just all about how do you maintain a higher standard for the entire human race, and maybe that's what we're experiencing now. It sure feels like a lot of Judgment Day stuff going on in our world, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel as though we are in the midst of those judgment days, and a lot of people are having to uproot themselves because of the things that are happening around them. I mean, we actually had to leave Hawaii to move to Tennessee because Tennessee maintains freedom, but Hawaii was no longer free. It was terrible what was going on there with the policies against unvaccinated people, and it continues today. Really amazing.
Yeah, it was shocking to me, Michael, to living in Nashville, having experienced what happened during the COVID pandemic from our perspective, and then to go to places like Denver, Colorado, or Los Angeles, and see what was going on out there. It's like, what? How are you allowing this to happen to you? You all of your freedoms, all of your rights have just been completely obliterated, and they were living in such incredible fear and terror that it was absolutely shocking. Again, coming from Nashville, where we approached this with kind of some normal sensibilities and precautions, and then you go to these places where they were just completely being oppressed by this. It was absolutely shocking.
Yeah, so there is definitely a separation happening now, and people are going to places that are more in alignment with their values. And this gets into what we're going to be talking about later, transhumanism, the kind of movement towards that. But I think that this, the whole jab thing is a key part of that process of transforming those that are willing to stay in the big cities, that are destined to become smart cities, controlled by 5G networks, and people being constantly upgraded in terms of the next jab, and that their software is going to be upgraded and become like our robots, transhumanists.
Yeah.
So, yeah. We'll definitely get into that.
What's wrong with that?
Right.
I mean, it's mind-boggling. And I wrote a book called Cloak of the Illuminati in the year 2002, and that was my first kind of foray into the whole transhuman area. And I remember back then I was especially fired up. My real interest in this light body phenomena, and again with the Anunnaki, is I started to see that the Anunnaki were called the Shining Ones. And one reason why was because they possessed a transmittable cloak or garment. Sitchin didn't know about this. This word was that refers to this garment was not really dug up by Sumerian scholars until the early 2000s. And the word is malamu. It's a Sumerian word that means radiance, luminosity, shining, and supernatural power. And it's a term that the Sumerians applied to the Anunnaki, to a cloak or garment that they wore, the malamu, that gave them their shining luminosity. And the thing is that this cloak or garment could be transmitted to a human. So an Anunnaki could provide this cloak or garment to a human, and a human that could become an Anunnaki, a shining one with luminosity, radiance, and superpowers, like the Anunnaki, which is why they were called the Mighty Ones. And as I'm tracking this, I'm noticing there's a whole continuous line of deities and even humans that acquired this garment. Enoch is one, Elijah, John the Baptist, Jesus, Mary Magdalene. They all have references to acquiring this miracle garment. And first part of 2002, as I'm finishing this book and talking about this garment, here comes this Department of Commerce report, U.S. Department of Commerce. They took all the big tech companies that were in existence back then. It was Apple, Microsoft, people like that, and said, some of you are working with bits or computer science. Some of you are working with atoms or nanotechnology. Some of you are working with neurons or neuroscience. And some of you are working with genes or genetics. And what we want to do is we want to merge all four of those technologies into a single seamless technology aimed at the human skin in order to introduce a new golden age and also a new type of human being. And when I was talking about that back in 2002, I'd be like on Coast to Coast or something, and people would literally write to me saying, "You're nuts. This will never happen. You will never see humans merge with technology." You know, David Icke is talking about people putting chips in their brain. You're talking about them replacing our whole skin and breaking the skin barrier and turning us into robots. And I said, yeah, that's the plan. They plan to do this by 2035. And I remember back in 2002, hey, at least we got another 33 years or so before this is going to happen. But now you look around and that is very clearly what is happening. And so this transhuman movement that we've referred to a couple of times has clearly been planned. It's driven by the military, and its ultimate objective is a new type of a human being where the powers that be believe they'll be able to make trillions of dollars by turning us literally into robots or machines.
And that's where your work, I think, comes in so importantly, because it does come up with a solution. I mean, the transhumanist movement is picking up, and people are just stumbling into it, based on choices that they're making now without realizing that they are preparing their body to be kind of like merged with technology. Is that you do have a solution to that. So you mentioned transhumanism in 2002, and I think you have it's your latest book, The Singularity is Near. So I guess that's what you're describing.
Yes, yeah. So I first started again on the transhuman trail in 2002, and then pursued other interests, but always my central focus is human transformation. Can humans transform into angels, and that whole process and the activation of the light body. And then I guess it was after 2008, 2009, I had worked on, I was an advisor to Robert Downey Jr. on the movie Iron Man. And I realized then that, they're going to start really pushing this now. And Iron Man was going to be a vehicle for that. Robert was concerned about that, and he knew I had a different viewpoint on it and wanted to try and, as he said, William Henry-ize Tony Stark a little bit to show especially kids that there's another path to power. You don't have to put some kind of nano elixir in your bloodstream or pack yourself into some stupid tin can nano suit to be a powerful being. You can activate latent capabilities from within you. And I realized that was going to be like the huge split right there, that as Iron Man really exploded, suddenly people are like going, yeah, I want to be like Iron Man. And so back then in around 2010, 2011, I started really talking more about the solution to transhumanism. And then in 2012, I wrote The Singularity is Near, which was a play on Ray Kurzweil's book, The Singularity is Near, which is when the AI becomes smarter than all of us combined. And of course, Google and the people that he works for are actively embracing that idea as the future for humanity. But I said, my whole mantra back then was, don't let them break the skin barrier under any circumstances, unless it's life or death, or unless it's temporary. Because it was very clear that the objective was to get under our skin and to start injecting various substances, nanoparticles, elixirs, to then ultimately transform us from the inside out into these cyborgs or robotic beings.
So, this is a really major movement, transhumanism, and it really is picking up steam. Now, I mean, there are people that think it's a good thing. I know when we have Elon Musk saying that, well, AI is the next threat and that merging with machines is the best way humans can deal with the threat posed by AI. So, do you think that's genuine, or do you think that's just kind of like just the Trojan horse for introducing transhumanism?
I have very serious concerns about AI, and I like to pay attention to Elon Musk because, again, he's certainly a mercurial person and a weather vane in a way. And I take him at face value when he says AI is demonic, and I believe it is demonic. It's an alien intelligence, and it's beyond human control. And I'm 99.999% sure we don't want to merge with AI in this technology. And I hold the door open 0.0001% based on the Catholic Church's views about aliens. I apply their logic about aliens to AI. And that logic is, well, if aliens exist and they land at the Vatican, we'll baptize them, one. And two, more importantly, the Vatican had put out some statements saying that, well, maybe these aliens won't look like us. And who are we to judge God's creativity? So that's the logic right there. Who am I to judge God's creativity? Maybe God always intended for us to perfect the human body by merging with AI. Maybe God sent Steve Jobs as his Messiah, and we just didn't realize it at the time. And he's leading the way into our merger with AI. Maybe Elon Musk is some kind of messianic figure that's going to lead us into some AI promised land. I don't think so, because I think if God wanted me to be a machine in an AI sense or a transhuman sense, he would have made me that way. And that what really is happening here is that we're ultimately challenging God's authority. And this is a battle that's been going on for eons. Transhumanism is not new. It originated with Christianity and has its roots in Christianity. And it's ultimately going to be Christianity that has to provide the solution, I feel, to transhumanism. And the reason I say it has its roots in Christianity is because it's particularly in the Christian religion where there's this ethos to return to our original state of being. When Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, they were in a place of pure light and pure love. They probably weren't even on earth. Some perspectives say Eden was in the third heaven. So it's not on earth. But in this original Edenic state, humans were living an enlightened state, an awakened state of pure light and pure love. And in the esoteric version of the story, we did not have physical flesh and blood bodies. We had energetic bodies of pure light and pure love. After the fall, when we were evicted from Eden, the book of Genesis says God did two things. One, he built a gate at the east of Eden, put a flashing, flaming sword in the middle of it, and forbade us to return. And secondly, God then made coats of skin for humans. Your Bible thumpers will say, well, yeah, that those coats of skin must have been some kind of animal skin, maybe cow skin or lamb skin or something like that. But the esoteric understanding of that is that the skins that were made for us are these bodies, which means we don't belong in these bodies. And the original premise of Christianity has always been, how do we get back through that gate of the gods? How do we get back through the gate of Eden, the stargate of Eden? This flesh and blood body is not going through that gate. A transformation is going to have to be undergone before we go through that gate. And so ever since that fall, especially in Christianity, esoteric-minded, spiritual-minded people have been looking for ways to return to that original state of being. And the way they would originally do that is through prayer, meditation, chanting, an ascetic lifestyle, that sort of thing. But then what happened historically, and this happened around the 10th century, is there was an invention that changed everything. And that invention was a plow that could be pulled by multiple oxen. What that did is it reduced the time that humans had to spend out in the fields trying to feed themselves, so that they could then have more spare time to get back to their original project, which was the perfection of their immortal light body and their ability to get back through that gate. Well, that invention of that plow was viewed as a gift from God. God wanted us to have more time to focus on our spiritual lives and develop our perfect light body, so he sent the plow. And that developed this ethos, especially within Christianity, that technology is a gift from God. This is when you started to see images of God holding a compass in his hand. That's a symbol of a tool. And that other tools started to follow. Eyeglasses emerged. The church went ballistic with the invention of eyeglasses. What do you mean you're going to augment your God-given body by putting on eyeglasses? If God wanted you to see the thinking went, he would have given you a decent set of eyes. So who are you to challenge God's authority? And so this is the beginning, really, of transhumanism, of augmenting the body towards perfection. But then what happened is that the technologists started to go really crazy with it and thinking, well, this perfection means we're gonna have increased intelligence, we're gonna have increased longevity, and with it came the control. And always, and this gets back to the battle I referenced earlier, especially originating with the archons, is that there is this class of beings, call them demons, whatever you like, that want to mock and mimic God, to create a synthetic version of what we can do organically, as a way of essentially just saying, we're challenging God's authority. And this is one of the biggest problems with transhumanism, is that these guys literally are playing God, and they've taken it upon themselves to believe that they can perfect the human race by merging us with AI.
That's fascinating. So the AI transhumanist movement is really trying to take this kind of human body and take it to the next level of merging it with machines, with technology, whereas your work is to get people to connect to the rainbow light body, which is actually a kind of like a spiritual body that is not dependent at all on this physical body, and that's the path to transcendence. So is that really, as we kind of like move into the later into this decade in the 2030s, is that going to really emerge as being the two main ways that people are going to move forward collectively? Either they're going to follow this kind of transhumanist curve and do everything that's expected of them and become kind of like these roboticized Iron Men with enhanced abilities, but really controlled by major corporations, or going down this path of becoming humans that are emancipated in terms of being fully connected with their rainbow light body, which I presume can kind of leave the skin suit and just go off and do whatever it needs to do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the choice, as I see it, is you're either going to follow the path of the archons or the path of the angels. And the angels, when you read the descriptions of them, have rainbow light bodies, at least in the Jewish mystical tradition and the Christian mystical tradition. And that's why I align them with the Tibetan rainbow light body. And the idea is that our body already has built within it the technology for transmutation. And in my view, anything that we introduce to the body from the outside via Silicon Valley type technology is not going to enhance our ability to attain our organic rainbow light body. It's going to prevent us from doing that. And ultimately, I think that is the purpose from an archonic perspective of this technology. Because look at the metaverse now. I mean, the basic idea of ascension is that there is a pure land, there's a kingdom of heaven, there's a realm of heaven, a higher frequency realm, call it 5D, whatever you want to call it, that exists outside of this reality. But with the archons driving transhumanism, their quest has always been to mock and mimic. And so what we see now is the creation of a fake reality, the metaverse, that is being presented as an ascended form or an ascended world. It's going to be better than this physical reality that you and I exist in right now in every way, shape, and form. And the argument that is already being put on the table and is being presented is that why would you want to stay in one of these crappy old organic human bodies when you can become a perfected being and live as an avatar online in this new perfect world? And in my view, that black box is nothing but a soul trap. And that is the choice that all of us are making right now. And what I try to encourage people to see is that they've already created this digital avatar version of themselves. They're already living it. Ever since from the very first moment that you turned on your first computer or your first smartphone, you started building the cells of this digital version of yourself. And what you haven't done yet, but which Mark Zuckerberg and others would really like for you to do, is to turn yourself into a cartoon and exist exclusively in the metaverse. That is their version of ascension, whether they consciously realize it or not. That is what they are selling. They are selling an ascension into the black box and immortality, digital immortality, and the promise of a life lived in a more perfect world online. And of course, as many people discuss, the trade-off here and the reason why people would want to do that is not just so they can inhabit this perfect online world, but in order to save this world, the material world, from climate change.
Well, I know this movie that came out a couple of years ago, Ready Player One, kind of like depicted the future when virtually all of society is living in this virtual reality, and there's just very little a percent of the population that is actually doing productive work and building things, construction and so forth. But it's really and the physical bodies are living in these kind of like really abysmal conditions, living conditions. But it's like you was just describing, that online you can achieve this kind of synthetic transcendence where you're a superhero doing incredible things.
Right, exactly. And that is appealing to a generation that really doesn't know anything better, really. But spiritual minded people have to be aware that everything that they're doing online has a spiritual consequence. And we haven't really made that connection yet. And I think that is really vital right now for people to see that. And I ask people this, a lot of people are interested in ascension. They believe in this idea of transcendence. And I'll just say, look, you've got a retirement plan, you got a healthcare plan, you got vacation plans. What's your ascension plan? Where are you going after this incarnation, and how are you going to get there? Because what we see on the other side is that companies like Microsoft and Facebook, Meta, they have a definite plan for you to follow, where you will drop your physical body and rapture yourself into that online world and live forever. They have a definite course set out for you. And we're being programmed to follow that course right now. And the idea that I try to, again, ask people to pay more attention to is that you already have this digital self that exists online that will live on long after your physical body has turned to dust. And once it seems to me people start to realize that, they start to make that connection and realize exactly how dangerous all of this online activity actually is from a spiritual perspective, because people are less and less identifying with their organic self, and most certainly their transcendent spiritual self, and are more and more identifying with their online self. How much time does the average person spend online right now? Is it 8 hours a day? And the next step is not to look at the glass, but actually to cross over the glass and inhabit that world more and more full time. And what I'm saying is that there is a version of yourself that is already negotiating with governments, has signed contracts with these corporations. They own you. They absolutely own us and all of our data. And it's time for people to wake up and realize that just literally the dark and demonic nature of what's actually happening right now.
So in terms of ascension, I know you teach courses, you do tours. Mm-hmm. So what is that? I mean, how can people achieve this ascension process and not be sucked into this transhumanist online path that is being kind of like encouraged by the corporations?
Well, my mantra has been that the antidote to artificial intelligence is to awaken our ascension intelligence, to become more like the angels. And in my view, ascension is a quest for wholeness, for holiness, for perfection. And everyone is at a different level on that quest. And the way I look at it, to put it in the most simple fashion, is that, and I go back, I actually derived this from the Epic of Gilgamesh. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, he is told by a Sumerian goddess, Inanna, that he's 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. And if he wants to make it through the gate of the gods, Gilgamesh is going to have to clean up his act. He's going to have to become not 2/3 divine, but fully divine. And from that, I took this idea that, well, what if archetypically speaking, all humans are basically 2/3 divine and 1/3 human? Divinity, like wholeness, which I say is is the ultimate objective of the quest for ascension. Divinity and wholeness are both symbolized by a circle, and a circle is 360 degrees. And so if Gilgamesh is 2/3 divine, that means that he's 240 out of 360. And so the way I encourage people to think about this is that basically, let's say we're all starting out at 240. And routinely on a day-to-day basis, we do things mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally that are reflective of our belief that we're at 240. When we're at, say, 270 or 280 on that scale, we're going to be doing different things mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. And the things that you'll be doing, Michael, at 280 are different from what I'll be doing at 280. But the idea is that you'll be doing different things, different actions when you're at that higher frequency. And the key to ascension, in my view, is to begin to figure out what will you be doing when you're at that higher frequency, and then start doing as many of those things as possible. And then this is how we raise our frequency, a term that we speak a lot about in ascension circles. So the key to it is actions. And it's, in my view, if a person is, let's say, in the 300s somewhere on this scale, let's say they're at 330, chances are they're not spending 8 hours a day online. Chances are they're not eating garbage food. chances are they're in an elevated state of love and compassion, and their actions are more reflective of that. And that to me is the key to our ascension. It's determining what actions, what new things will you be doing at those higher frequencies, and then starting to do those things in order to raise yourself to that frequency.
In terms of this space age that we're now entering, we are moving into an era where there's going to be mass transit of people into space. And
Maybe.
I guess this is going to be something that the transhumanist movement is going to kind of like merge with, because it's going to be argued that, well, if you want to travel into space and do things out there, then this merging with technologies is going to be critical for that. But of course, there's this kind of spiritual tradition where they talk about people being able to develop these Merkaba space-time vehicles. I mean, Drumville of Melchizedek wrote The Flower of Life, I think in the 80s, and he began talking about that. So is that real? I mean, is there a personal space-time device, a Merkaba that we all have, and it's all about achieving the right frequency and ascension, and then we can activate that and actually become space travelers without the use of technology?
Absolutely. The Apostle Paul said it best, and I think it's a cosmic law. Flesh and blood can't inherit the kingdom of heaven. Our body is not designed to live in space. And NASA's known this since 1962. That's when they started looking into pharmaceuticals and other ways to enhance the human body so it could survive in space. And this is when the term cyborg was first coined. And so that means that there's only two ways that we can go into space. If our flesh and blood body is not going into space, then how are we going to go into space? Well, to me, the only two choices are where they're going to go as robots, transhuman beings, or as light beings. And I think you can look for evidence for both, especially in the ancient world, because that cosmic law would apply to everybody coming here. Anunaki, for example. You look at some of the depictions of the Anunnaki, you read their stories, look at some of the Egyptian depictions of Osiris and Ptah. They look like robots. You could make that argument that they were technological beings that could then phase into some other form. But I also think that the Anunnaki were energetic light beings who could then phase into physicality and then phase back out of physicality into their light body phase. And I think that's how many of these beings are traveling the stars. And this is something we're confronting right now. So human beings will not colonize Mars, period. Transhuman beings will or could, but not human beings. It's the end of the road for human beings as we begin to migrate into space.
So the extraterrestrials have just been down this path just a lot earlier than us, but essentially it all boils down to one of those three paths. Either it's going to be robots going into space, transhumanists going into space, or people in light bodies going into space. And certainly that kind of explains a lot of the positive extraterrestrials that come here. They seem to be beings that are kind of like light beings in the fourth, fifth density, and they kind of step down to interact with us. And,
right.
And that's, so it seems to be consistent with what a lot of people have been saying.
Absolutely. And instead of step down, I just use the word phase. They can phase out of their light body into a physical flesh and blood body, and then activate its latent capabilities and phase the flesh and blood body back into the light body and beam themselves throughout the cosmos.
Well, one of the things that I'm very interested in now, I mean, I'm doing regular webinars, and my next webinar is going to be focusing on time travel. And one of the things that I find fascinating is that, the time travel seems to be kind of similar to space technologies or space travel, in terms of you can either have a hard technology and kind of humans developing some kind of symbiosis with machines to be able to travel through time, or again, you can travel through time using this kind of light body or this Merkaba vehicle. So time travel, have you come across that in your research, and that is actually something that can be achieved through this kind of organic or this rainbow light body?
Yeah, I think so, Michael. I mean, that because I liken time travel to travel through stargates, and going back to your earlier comments, I really went down that path full force back late 90s and early 2000s, and started seeing again from reading Sitchin that in many of the depictions of the Anunnaki, I didn't see spaceships in the depictions. I saw portals and gateways, and accompanying those portals and gateways were stories about human transformation. And so I started realizing, well, there's something else going on here. And that you mentioned my work in Iraq, and this perhaps is a good segue to talk about that as an example of how my thinking developed in that area. I became very intrigued by Saddam Hussein. 1991, of course, where we got the first Gulf War going on, and everybody's watching CNN, and all of a sudden here's this commentator that says, oh, Saddam Hussein believes he's the reincarnated biblical king Nebuchadnezzar. I'm like, what? And I didn't really know who Nebuchadnezzar was, but I started reading up on him and started following Saddam Hussein and profiling him throughout the 90s and his quest to rebuild Babylon. He had spent $500 million rebuilding Babylon in order to create sort of a Disneyland for the Anunnaki. And of course, the Bible prophecy says that in order when the Lord returns, Babylon will be rebuilt so that it can be destroyed. And it appeared almost like they were reading the book of Revelation like a cookbook or something during those years in the 90s. But Saddam just really intrigued me, and especially Nebuchadnezzar intrigued me. And there was a wonderful story, just a mind-blowing story, actually, where after Nebuchadnezzar had destroyed the Temple of Solomon and perhaps brought the Ark of the Covenant back to Babylon, he also brought 10,000 of the elite of the Jewish population from Jerusalem to Babylon, including the wise men from the Temple of Solomon. 3 of them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in particular, were among those that were brought to Babylon. And Nebuchadnezzar had this gleaming golden image of the beast that he had acquired, but he couldn't make it work. But he knew that the wise men from the Temple of Solomon could. And so what happens in the story is he makes a wager with them that if they can enter this fiery furnace in return, that he would convert to their religion. Well, in the story, this is what was so intriguing to me, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, before going into this fiery furnace, put on their coat, their hat, and their other garments. They enter into the fiery furnace, and when they come back out, they're not alone. They have one like the Son of God, or depending on which version of the translation of the Bible you read, the actual Son of God in tow with them. Well, who's this? And what is this story really all about? I read it as a Stargate story, that they had opened this fiery furnace. The coat, hat, and the other garments those are the garments of the Anunnaki. That's the Malamu that they were putting on, this light body garment. This is they're phasing into a light body capable of entering into this other dimensional realm. They go and get the Son of God. They bring him back out, and the Bible ends the story right there. But in the Babylonian tradition, this god, whose name is Nebo, brings with him profound cosmic knowledge, and they build pyramids for him, ziggurats for him, and it becomes this whole training center for humans then to be able to enter into these higher dimensional spaces. And that is in my opinion, partly a time travel story, but most certainly a Stargate story.
Well, I remember reading your material back in 2003 where you talked about the stargates that were discovered in Iraq, and that this was the real reason for the invasion of Iraq. And I was really amazed because I just hadn't considered that at the time. But I remember doing research and finding additional information that just kind of like corroborated what you were saying, that in fact, this was the real reason for the invasion. It had nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction. It was more weapons of mass distraction, if you like, that Saddam Hussein really believed that he was the reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar, and that he
Yeah.
was going to reveal the stargates, this ancient extraterrestrial history, to the world. And so, well, the Americans and the secret societies wanted to take him out.
Absolutely. And again, this wasn't something I've just made up. I was profiling him through the 90s, and especially following him through the art newspapers, because your art news and the people in the art world would watch the UN weapons inspectors go into Iraq and come back out with their pockets loaded full of ancient Sumerian artifacts, and were selling them on the black market. And the art world was calling foul on that. And as I continued to follow that trail, I realized what Saddam was actually doing, and that it became a real easy an easy forecast for me to say, look, if and I did this on Coast to Coast in 2000. I said, if Bush and Cheney are elected, we'll be in Iraq within 6 months. I was wrong. It took us a few years to get there, but I knew we were going. And this is the reason why, because you can't have Nebuchadnezzar running loose on our planet. Just imagine what Saddam might have known if he could remember his incarnation as this biblical king. He certainly honored it and made it absolutely clear that he believed he was this figure. And if you extrapolate that even just a little bit to think Nebuchadnezzar, one of the most powerful kings of the ancient world, he knew what the Ark of the Covenant was, where it was. This is all wrapped up in biblical prophecy and end time prophecy. And I mean, we're talking about a major ancient figure on the world stage getting ready to perhaps fulfill some kind of a messianic prophecy. And this was not going to happen from a Jewish, Christian, or even an Islamic perspective.
So with that Iraq invasion, well, I mean, you have the first Persian Gulf War with George Bush Sr., and then the second one in 2003 with George W. Bush. I mean, do you think it was just them and the neocons, or do you think there was a secret society behind them? One of the things that I've just recently found was that Freemasons play a key role whenever any new technology is found in these archaeological digs, especially advanced technologies that were used by these previous civilizations. The Freemasons move in and take control. And any government that disagrees with that is pretty much undermined and removed, which is exactly what happened to Saddam Hussein. And so do you know anything about that? I mean, do you know of any, rather than the neocons and the Bushes being behind it, do you think there was a secret society? Do you know who that might have been?
No, I don't. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, there's obviously some invisible order that is maybe hundreds, if not thousands of years in advance of us that are behind a lot of this or pulling the strings. But no, I don't know anything specifically about that.
I know that there's kind of like this material called the Wingmakers. I don't know if you've come across that. And that talks about an artifact, extraterrestrial artifact found around, I think, 800 AD that presumably is from the future humans. Some people think that those future humans are kind of like, well, time travelers, obviously. So could these future humans be time travelers here to kind of like teach us? Because the artifacts found at Shackle Canyon supposedly were stimulating this kind of ascension process, seem to be stimulating this organic evolution of consciousness, and that the Wingmakers material, when it was initially released, that around 2002, the website was taken over and went in a new direction, talking about AI and extraterrestrial threats to kind of take us away from the original idea of an organic human consciousness that could be stimulated to go down this other path.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar with the Wingmakers material, but there does seem to be a technology, a lost technology that's at the center of all of this. One term for it. You used the Merkaba throne. Drumbulose Merkaba is Drumbulose Merkaba. Okay, it's not the same as the Merkaba of Essene or Jewish mysticism. He kind of, he just, it's his own thing. Okay, but when you look into the Jewish and early Christian idea of the Merkaba, it goes back to the Sumerians and most certainly, of course, the Anunnaki. And it is the preoccupation of all the ancient mystics. And there is at the center of it a throne, when that's what the Merkaba means. It's a celestial chariot or celestial throne. And there is a kind of a, to use the word, a game of thrones where this throne of God has been brought to earth by celestial beings. It's periodically assembled and then disassembled. And this is the focus of many of these end time prophecies from the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic perspective. And this, I think, is in part is what Saddam understood and what he was after. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad has referred to it when he was president of Iran. It is discussed in the end time prophecy circles. And I think Edgar Mitchell was also very interested in this as well. He thought of it as an extraterrestrial technology brought to Earth by angels from a contiguous universe. I'm positive that is the technology that Edgar Mitchell was seeking as well. And it's most certainly a free energy device. It has connections with ascension, with stargates, with human transformation. And it is the basis for, again, the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic prophecies about what is going to happen in our time.
I don't know if you've come across the Transylvania book series that Peter Moon has edited, but it's all about the discovery of a hall of records in the Bujir Mountains of Romania, and that's connected by a tunnel to Iraq. And it was discovered around the same time, 2003, 2004. And it was very interesting that at that same time, apparently you have a hall of records found in Iraq and a hall of records found in Romania that are connected. Now, the Freemasons apparently approached the Romanian government and said, hey, you have this technology, but we want to have access. So if you're going to kind of like continue to function, we want you to join NATO for your protection. So that's what they did. They joined NATO the very next year. And of course, Iraq, Saddam Hussein, told them to get lost. And so then you have Iraq being invaded. So I thought that's interesting. You have these halls of records found, the repositories of ancient technologies in Iraq and Romania. The Romanian government decides to cooperate with the secret government, the Freemasons and the whoever else is behind that, whereas Saddam Hussein said no.
Yeah. Huh. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. And I remember also, Michael, it's almost gets to the point where you need to have a reincarnation scorecard or something, because Saddam then came out and said that George W. Bush was the reincarnation of Hulagu, who is the grandson of Genghis Khan. And you just start to think, well, okay, reincarnation is a really important part of this. And these guys are obviously carrying knowledge from incarnation to incarnation, at least theoretically. And I think that's a really fascinating thing that's happening in our world right now. And we mentioned, for example, Mark Zuckerberg earlier, who was kind of intrigued to read the story, his wife's account of their honeymoon. They went to Rome for their honeymoon, she and Mark Zuckerberg. And she said there was me, there was Mark, and there was Caesar. Because Mark is obsessed with Julius Caesar to the point where he thinks he's Caesar. And that explains his haircut. And just think about it. If it's possible that Saddam was Nebuchadnezzar and George W. Bush was the grandson of Genghis Khan, it's like Mark Zuckerberg, like a returned Caesar. I mean, it explains a lot, and it really makes you wonder what exactly is going on in our world, and who really are some of these people we're dealing with. Who's Elon Musk, for example?
Fascinating. Yeah, I think a lot of us actually doing this work are probably reincarnations of these historic figures that have been fighting the good fight for freedom for a
Children of
long,
light
long time.
versus the children of darkness. Yeah.
Yeah.
We keep lining up. It's the same old thing. And that should give you a sense of thrill, honor, mission, and understanding as well. And I take it deadly seriously. I mean, I really do feel like the book of Revelations, chapter 20 through 22, are probably the best navigational tool we have right now. It's the only book that I know of that's really giving us a forecast or an understanding of what is going on and what is to come, and also the good news that the children of light are going to be victorious.
One of the things that I've been focusing on the last year is the arrival of groups of extraterrestrials, advanced extraterrestrials. Some people call them the Guardians, some call them the Seeders. And apparently when they arrived, these space arcs began to activate on the Earth and elsewhere in our solar system. And these are ancient artifacts built by these groups many, many thousands of years ago that are kind of buried. And apparently one of these things was described in the Noah's story, or the Epic of Gilgamesh, that in fact it wasn't a wooden boat that carried two of each kind of animal and a bunch of people to safety, that it was an actual space ark. So do you think Noah's Ark was an actual wooden boat, or do you think it could have been a space ark?
You know, I'm pretty sure it wasn't a wooden boat. I'm just following the line right now. As I said a moment ago, there was that judgment in Noah's time, and Noah was found to be perfect in his generation. And then it says Noah walked with God. Well, wait a minute. Enoch walked with God, and he attained his perfect light body through the help of the archangel Michael. What if Noah attained his perfect light body, and that is how he was able to cross over the flood? That's not to say there couldn't have been some vehicle in between there. Definitely not a wooden boat, but I really am focused on this idea that, well, what if Noah? What if we haven't really looked deeply enough into the story of Noah to see that he also attained his rainbow light body, and that is how he crossed over the flood? And maybe that's why the rainbow was sent as a symbol of God's covenant that he would never destroy the world again by flood. Just thinking out loud here, that possibility, because the reason I like that line of thinking, Michael, is because that I can do something about that today. I mean, I could go looking for a space ark. I could go out to Skinwalker Ranch and pick up a shovel and start digging for something buried underneath there, because there's definitely something there. And who knows, it could be a ship of some kind. But I know that I also can work on perfecting myself, becoming more whole, behaving more in a holy and more righteous fashion. I can do that now, and I can have an impact on my personal well-being by doing that, as well as be impactful in an immediate and positive way upon everyone around me. And I really do feel that if we're going to move through this period, we're really going to have to bump up our holiness and righteousness factor within each of us. And love and compassion, it's become such a, almost like it's so trite to say it, but that really is our way forward. We have to become more like these high celestial beings, these righteous beings, in order to move through what the scenario that we're all walking through right now.
I know on your website, you discuss different ways that people can achieve ascension, and you have courses and you have tours. So can you kind of like explain to people, what they would need to do if they were interested in beginning seriously this path of ascension? Thank you.
Yeah. I have courses available on my website, which is williamhenry.net. In fact, I've got a weekend webinar, or excuse me, a weekend event coming up in Nashville in October called Halo 3.0, where I'll actually, in this iteration of this series be taking a really deep dive into the Apocryphon of John. The secret gospel or secret book of John is the one that, from the Gnostic perspective, laid out the whole story of the archons and was the forerunner or the book that laid down the groundwork for a lot of our understanding of the simulation theory, simulated reality, and how the archons would create a simulated reality in order to mimic or mock God. So that's going to be, if that is a subject that people are interested in, they won't want to miss my weekend event in October.
Yeah, I saw that. It's very tempting. I think I might even make the trip over to Nashville, seeing as I live now in East Tennessee, because that looked fascinating. Yeah. And Nashville is really an amazing city. So we haven't traveled there yet, but my wife and I do plan to do that.
Great. Well, good for you. Yeah. Well, and again, welcome to Tennessee. It's such a lovely place. It's got a very rich history of ancient history that most people aren't aware of. Ancient Nashville was an ascension center. There's over 300,000 bodies that are interred underneath Nashville that were brought here from all over North America. It was a city of the dead. It's like Abydos in Egypt or Saqqara in Egypt. It was a sacred burial place because of its role in the very, very ancient world. And all of the artifacts that have been found here in Nashville from what are called the Woodlands people tell of this path of souls and the soul's journey into the stars, of star beings coming down and assisting us in transformation. And what that means is that modern Nashville is overlaid or superimposed on a really rich history that is really profound, and it's knowledge that we need to bring forward today. So it doesn't surprise me that you found your way to Tennessee.
Yeah, well, I think you're doing very important work there, and I fully support what you're trying to do and introduce people to Ascension, to the rainbow light body, and to kind of like present a different path, an alternative to this kind of like powerful movement towards transhumanism. So that's very important work that you're doing. So where do people go to kind of find out about all of this?
To my website, williamhenry.net. I've got a number of articles there on the subject, especially of AI and transhumanism that I've been writing over the past 10 years or so. So I invite you to visit me there at williamhenry.net.
Well, I want to thank you, William, for being on the show, and I look forward to seeing you soon in Nashville.
It's my pleasure, Michael. And again, welcome to Tennessee, and I look forward to seeing you here soon.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.